Good evening, everybody. I think we're going to get started. Probably some more people will come in, and there are only a few seats left. So I'm going to begin. Welcome. I'm Margaret Miller. I'm director of the Institute for Research in Art. Are you ready? That includes, or is the umbrella for, the Contemporary Art Museum, Graphic Studio, and Public Art. Welcome to the conversation before the reception for CAM's current exhibition, Return of the Real. I was going to recognize the Dean. Are you here, Dean Moy? No? Wally here? No? Okay, I'll just move on then. Return of the Real is the third exhibition curated by Christian Viveros-Fauné, CAM's Curator-at-large. Christian Viveros-Fauné is an independent art critic and curator. He was appointed as our Curator-at-large in August 2018. He has introduced us to new artists and has launched a series of politically and socially engaged exhibitions that connect our students in the broader Tampa Bay community to current trends in the global art world. I might just insert here that for, I would think it's about 10 years, I've tried to get a Warhol grant, and we just got a big one, and I think it's... It's partly Christian's, how shall I say, collaboration with the other members of our exhibition curatorial staff, and that is Noel Smith, Deputy Director of the Contemporary Art Museum, but also Curator of Latin American and Caribbean Art, and Sarah Howard, who is our Curator of Public Art and Social Practice, and I like to think I'm part of that team too. So we cooked up a series of pretty interesting exhibitions, which you're going to find more out, about as we proceed. And I do encourage you at this point to stop by the desk at CAM and pick up our calendar and put on your calendar some of the important dates of upcoming events. For Return of the Real, Christian collaborated with New York-based sculptor Robert Lazzarini and Los Angeles-based artist Rodrigo Valenzuela to present two solo installations of objects and images that are partly inspired by the culture of fake news and alternative facts. You see, we're always right up to date. Viewers will encounter works that require a new way of looking and require a shifting of point of view and challenge our understanding of what is real. In different ways, these two artists have disrupted the cognitive process of recognition. Both artists make work that is grounded in materiality, and the materials used by the artists offer some challenges for the CAM's installation team. And you'll see these when you go over to the show, but Robert Lazzarini's 700-pound fake fence came from New York in one piece. That was a challenge to find a truck that could do that. It took 15, 20 staff members from Graphic Studio in the museum to actually get it off the truck and into the gallery. And then we had to drill holes into the floor of the museum in order to anchor this piece. So Robert Lazzarini and Rodrigo Valenzuela worked independently. They came at two different times to work on their installations. And Rodrigo also brought us a challenge. And we luckily have the wonderful Chuck McGee over in the ceramics department. And we created a false wall. And Rodrigo proceeded to spray the wall with clay slip. So really get up close and have a look at that wall, those textures that resulted in that. I want to recognize the faculty and staff of the Institute for Research in Art. It is really a terrific staff, and I really think it's largely why we got the Warhol grant, because they sent a party down from the Warhol Foundation, and they were here for a couple of days looking at our program and an earlier exhibition that Christian curated, and were, I think, impressed by the level of professionalism. We are accredited, and we also get grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, from the state of Florida, locally, and we make every effort to raise funding from the community and beyond to be able to provide these extraordinary exhibitions for this community. Noel Smith, as I mentioned, is Deputy Director of the museum. She coordinated all details of organizing the exhibition with the assistance of our program coordinator, Amy Allison. Shannon Annis is really in her heart of hearts. She's a registrar, but I got her to apply for the position of curator of the collection and exhibitions manager, and she worked closely with the curator and the artist to arrange for loans and for shipping the artworks to the campus. Exhibitions designer Tony Palms worked with the artist to design the installation, along with Eric Jonas. Vincent Krall, our chief preparator, led the installation crew. Curator of Education Leslie L. Saucer designed the education program, including this conversation tonight. Curator of New Media Don Fuller provided oversight and design of all printed materials. He was assisted by Marty de la Cruz. Other staff are recognized for assisting with the details of organizing the exhibition installation and the educational programs, and they include Jessica Barber, Alyssa Cordero, who's no longer with us, she went off to grad school, Mark Fredericks, Ashley Jablonski, Will Litch, David Waterman, and Randall West. We also are very pleased to have students working with us, including, and I hope I do a good job with these names, Adam Bast, Kiki Lomo Tentand, Annalieth Garzon, Olivia Gasparoni, Jacob Greenstein, Jillian, this is a tough one, Olor Tige, and Veronica Sengsbradel. We appreciate the work students do as they engage in the CAM Club, the Contemporary Art Museum's student club, and they have helped us in so many ways. I would also like to say that we have, and some tonight are here, faculty from other areas of the campus. But in this particular case, I want to thank Matthew Kennedy of the USF School of Music and Chuck McGee, as I mentioned earlier, from the School of Art and Art History. This exhibition is funded by CAM's Corporate Partnership Program. If you don't know about that program, we create exhibitions for corporate sponsors, and they in turn make gifts to the museum that allows us to put on exhibitions like this. Most of all, I extend my deep appreciation to Robert Lazzarini and Rodrigo Valenzuela for their engagement, support, and generosity. Meaningful and powerful exhibitions require great art, and you both have brought to Tampa surprising and brilliant works. Thank you. I hope you also have a couple of upcoming events, so I want you to remember and write down and attend. Philadelphia-based Alex DeCourt will give a free talk at the Tampa Theater. Do you all know where that is? Downtown. Tuesday, September 10th at 7 p.m. I promise you it will be a most engaging evening. Alex deconstructs familiar aspects of American pop culture and creates large-scale installations that often include video, wall-based works, floor pieces, sculptures, lights, and even scents. And we're really trying to seduce him to come here and do an installation downtown. The title of Alex's talk is Stink, Stank, Stunk. And it starts at 7 p.m. We do have an RSVP line at the Contemporary Art Museum, and we would like to have you reserve a free ticket. Another event is scheduled for October 8th and 9th, and the College of the Arts is working with the Tampa International Airport. And on October 8th, Nick Cave will give a talk at the airport, and you're all invited. We're about to send out the card for that. If you're a student and want a bus to the airport, we'll bus you there and bring you back. It's free. There'll be a reception prior to a talk that will begin at 7 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, you will be led over to the rental car center where you can view the tapestry created by Nick Cave and Bob Faust. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Christian Viveros-Fauné, who will introduce you further and more completely to Robert Lazzarini and Rodrigo Valenzuela. Following this conversation, which will end around 7, please come over to the Contemporary Art Museum for a reception for the exhibition. Thank you all for being here tonight. Christian?
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, USFCAM. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Robert Lazzarini and Rodrigo Valenzuela, for being here. This is a really sort of special show for me because we haven't known each other quite that long. Robert and I have known each other for years and years. A long time, going back to our Brooklyn days, exactly. But at some point in sort of seeing both their work, I sort of had a little bit of a eureka moment, and imagined that they would play very well together. And in fact, I think they do. And so what we'll try and do tonight is have sort of a three-way conversation that will be a bit of a lead into what really is the final act, which is the work over there. And I think, essentially the show and their work speaks for itself, and I think that you will really, really enjoy. By way of introduction, I'm just going to run through a couple of thoughts, some of which are in the brochure text that I wrote for the show. And so I want to sort of mention the word epistemology. Epistemology is a fancy word that philosophers use when referring to the study of knowledge. An epistemological crisis, if you will, at least according to someone like Hannah Arendt, is a disruption in which the distinction between fact and fiction, that is the reality of experience, and the distinction between what's true and what's false, that is, according to her, the standards of thought, get mixed up, right? Periods like those disruptions, produce important alterations in commonly accepted ideas. These in turn often lead to epochal dislocations in which entire populations reject the premises of logic, science, and other confirmable propositions for conspiracy theories, mass delusions, and magical thinking. Sound familiar? Some examples of these delusions, at least today, are, for example, just to grab them out of the air, the following. Barack Obama wasn't born in the US. The moon landing was faked. The CIA created AIDS in the laboratory. The earth is flat. 9/11 was an inside job. Lizard people, aka reptilians, run the world. That's actually a pretty common sort of fantasy these days. The FDA is withholding the cure for cancer. Politicians ran a child prostitution ring from a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor. Climate change is a hoax. These and other conspiracies typify our culture today. Far more insidious than that great phrase that Richard Hofstadter dubbed the paranoid style of politics. These sort of 21st century myths constitute an environment in which reality becomes pliable, right? Suggestible, subject to manipulation. Such periods are the playground of politicians and ideologues. But the funny thing is that since at least the time of the Surrealists, they've been perfect fodder for artists, right? Enter our friends, right? Robert and Rodrigo. In an era of alternative facts and sort of manufactured fears and fake news, both of these guys, along with a number of other folks who are making work out there, right, both in this country and elsewhere, they've selected to rearrange and reconstruct and ultimately recreate alternate versions of reality in order to question its most fundamental premises. Together, these guys who work on separate coasts, Robert in New York and Rodrigo in Los Angeles, exemplify a certain kind of fact-based artist, right? One who mobilizes the real in order to undermine its basic tenets. Their two-person exhibition, I think, illustrates, among other things, how reality is made up more than just by perception, right? By the evidence of our senses. It suggests, among other things, that its surfaces, the surfaces of reality, can in fact harbor really strange, eerie, and fantastical possibilities. One of the things that I note that is so clear to me about both of your work is how much you guys think about the viewer in both of your practices, which are very different. And I'm glad here we've got some images, in fact, of Idor, of Robert's, and some photographs of Rodrigo's. But I'm struck by how much you position the viewer both sort of inside and outside the work, and always suggest somehow that the evidence of his or her senses is somehow suspect. Is that a fair way to sort of describe your work?
Yes.
Come on, you haven't been shy all day, so what are you like sort of pop?
Yeah, yeah, it certainly is. I mean, for me, you know, I'm always thinking about the viewer because part of the thing that really completes the work is the participation of the viewer. And in that sense, it's not a performative work, but it's something that really solicits the viewer to move around the object or the images on the wall to really understand kind of the logic of the work, which I hope is something that is never kind of completely revealed, that it's something that's kind of always shape-shifting and always changing. But that idea of, you know, proximity and the physical participation of the viewer is very important to me.
I think as artists too, being aware, this is not,
Here.
is this working?
Let's share. Let's share.
No, this is working now.
No.
You're sharing, you're sharing a museum, so why not?
And I'm sitting next to you.
What I want to say is that when you make stuff too, like at least in my case, I study philosophy and I study art history, so I was looking at art always very critically, or thinking about how, like I haven't understood how like artists make work. So like for me, the way I set the camera or the way I made photos is setting myself as the viewer and trying to make the work I want to see too, and the work that want to make me keep thinking about the work that someone is making, right? So like there is certain unfinishedness that need to be complete by the viewer in some way. So I can't guess what people want to think about it. But as I was saying, some people in the studio visit yesterday, I think it's very important to consider what you can think with the work, what you can think while you're looking at something. And I think that is the work that keep living in some way, that you keep coming back because it's bringing a different thought every single time. So yeah, spending some time to look at your own work and and remember to be an audience and not just making works kind of to impress yourself, right? So there is a moment where you have to like, you know, I mean, that's one of the reasons I made that tower that is kind of like a bird's eye view perspective. And I think that this environment doesn't happen enough in our political views, right? We just like decide that we love something and then we're not gonna like negotiate with that moment, right? We're not gonna like kind of give. I mean, it's interesting when you go to see your relatives and watch other TV shows you would usually watch. And you know, there is not enough this environment from your own social position to be able to question what do you really believe. So I think having these perspectives from in the tower or on the photos, I think is very important to like make you aware that you have a position.
Well, you know, one of the things both of you guys do in totally and radically different ways is remake stuff, right? So maybe, Robert, you can explain how you do it, and then Rodrigo, you can explain how you do it, because I think that's a fundamental part of both of your practices.
Sure. Of course, it's different with every object, but basically, you know, so my objects are all appropriated. So what that means is that I'm basing it on something that already exists in the world. And then one of the conceits of my work is there's no material translation. So what that simply means is it is the material, or it's made from the same material that the original object is made from.
You mean it's not made of plaster or bronze?
Yeah,
or,
it's
you know,
not,
you make
there's
a
no kind of
skull
art materiality translation. So it's, you know, the police barrier is made of wood, the fence is made of carbon steel, so on and so on.
Well, wait, but the fence is, and I also sort of want to illuminate a little bit about the complexity of like making something like the fence, and then, you know, every one of your other pieces. How many pieces are in that fence?
Over 350 cast pieces make up the fence. It was an engineering feat to get that accomplished.
Right.
In fact, I told some students earlier that we met with Zaha Hadid's fabricators, who we were in an R&D stage for it for about 2 months, and they were like, at the end of it, they were like, for your budget, which was decent, they were like, this is an unmakeable object. And I'm faced with that kind of thing a lot, as you imagine, because, you know, in many cases, I'm recreating something that has been fabricated industrially or commercially using parallel and perpendicular construction. And obviously, when I start to distort things mathematically, that goes out the window right away. So wood and metal don't necessarily feel like being cajoled into the various positions that I'm putting them into. So it's a challenging thing. It's also a challenging.
Or bone, right? Because you've used
cast bone. Yeah, exactly, for the skulls. But point being is that, you know, by eliminating material translation, by eliminating scale shifts, usually my works are 1-to-1 scale, by eliminating kind of these embellished titles. I mean, the fence is called Fence, I think, is the title, and, you know, the police barricade, I'm pretty sure the title is Police Barricade. So by eliminating all these things, what I'm allowing, so transformation is gone on those levels, so what I'm allowing is transformation to really inhabit the relationship between the viewer and the piece. That's where transformation lives in my work. So the space around the object, in other words.
And Rodrigo, how does you do what essentially is, I mean, it's been called constructive photography, stage photography, any number of things. I don't know how comfortable you are with those labels, as it were, those definitions. But essentially, what you do is you build sets, right?
Yeah.
Which you then photograph.
Yeah, I mean, the set, I think the thing with the sets, on building sets, is complicated because I think, you know, right now I'm moving to a new house and you're setting a stage for living, right, in the place I can feel comfortable. And we don't look at a lot of environments as these places that they are so considered into like, I mean, you look at the domestic space, and for you it's so easy, but like all the houses are so. The best example I can put is I grew up in the projects in Chile, like in a very government buildings, very, very, very simple apartments, very small apartments. So there is a lot of, there were like 100 or 200 units in the building, right? And every house is the same. Right, like it's something that never occurred to me when I was a kid asking where is the bathroom. Like all the 100% of the houses in the building have the same bathroom, the same layout, right? But there is something that happens when you walk inside your houses and you're like, that is your parents' bedroom, that is my bedroom, there is a living room, you know, there is like, you get to know so much about like these little things that people do with the same location, right? The same layout, something that is very clear in your mind. And then suddenly you know that is a personality. That is something that people address as like their way of being, right, in the world, for small gestures, small things. So I think when you make these stages in the studio, I am trying to translate the things that I see in my everyday life and trying to see and learn from them. And in some way, the way that you are using the materials, what the object is made, I'm thinking in similar ways, and like what do I know about the object before I photograph it, right? And so by making it by hand, I can learn about what is the, I mean, life is so, I mean, without like, it's a slippery slope where like you're so amazed by the world that you can become this like crazy new age like hippie where you're like, it's amazing, that bottle, right? But like you also can be like, it is very complex, right? It's like, it is very complex that there is some lids that like make you spill all the coffee. Like, you know, there is a lot of complexity in these things, so you learn a lot by making it and understand which one is the one that you understand as something, right? There is things that qualify as a table, and there is other things that like, not every flat object with 4 legs is a table, right? So like you understand certain categorization of objects. And I think by making it and remaking it, you like kind of get this like collective consciousness of what the object means.
Robert, does that happen to you as well, when you're basically sort of like doing these warped versions of, you know, whatever the size of the piece is? Do you get a sort of a different understanding, an intimate understanding of what that object might be?
I mean, I do. I mean, there's always a place in the object that's like kind of open for interpretation. But yeah, I'm invested in that. And that's why my design process tends to be super, super heavy. It's not that it's like the way that I'm aestheticizing the work is not intuitive. It's just that I need to be extremely convinced that I'm about to make this object over the next 2 years and spend $60,000 to make this object before I make it. I mean, there's a larger discourse that we won't get into here about the economy of the studio and, you know, what the implications are for taking risks as an artist if you're a painter and you're spending $200 or you're spending $50,000 to make a sculpture. That's an interesting discussion. But as it applies to me and becoming intimate with the object, my design phase is extensive. So there's a lot of model making. And I probably go further than I need to, but it's like, you know, it's what's necessary to then spend 2 years or 3 years or whatever to make a very expensive engineered object. So there needs to be a commitment there.
Yeah, but there is an emotional consciousness that happens when you pick a fence that is industrial fence rather than a picket fence, right? Like you're not disrupting, you're not, and that's what I mean with the collective consciousness of the spaces, where you're not warping something that protects home, right? You are like warping somebody that protects construction or like a big crowd or something, you know. So like there is.
Yeah, well, to speak to that, so the fence comes from like an industrial park. One of the impetus for the work and related works was the idea of a kind of object as landscape. How could these kind of archetypes function as like a particular place in a particular time with a particular condition and kind of resonate as landscape, even though they were objects? That's the way I was thinking about them. The payphone is absolutely the same thing. I was living in.
But describe the payphone, because these folks may not necessarily. They may not necessarily have gone to the Whitney Biennial in, what was it, 2000?
1898, I think.
There you go, whatever.
It was a long time ago.
You remember the 1898 Whitney Biennial?
So it was a mathematical, at the time my studio was in Hell's Kitchen, and it was the first time that I was really thinking about that idea of like, what could I kind of grab from this, 10 blocks that really was a signifier for the entire landscape. And I was looking at the payphone, which at the time was really kind of not being used so much as a payphone and more kind of as just like a place for maybe somebody to like lean or like spill their coffee or take
light up
or like their crack pipe or take like a cell phone call. So I was interested in the idea of that kind of historicity of the object. So here was something that was present, ubiquitous, and also kind of fading and fleeting. So, but it's still a marker, it marked time. And even within the payphone, I was interested in the idea that like, I would have a 9X logo on the coin box, but it was a Verizon payphone and a Bell Atlantic poster on the back of it. So even within the object itself was this kind of like layered idea of like kind of things passing and fleeting and whatnot. So, but it's a mathematical distortion of a New York City payphone that is made from all the same materials that a New York City payphone is.
And which functions, I think one of you guys mentioned the word archetype, as an archetypical sort of image.
Yeah, I mean,
or object in your case. Go on.
No, I was just going to say that, my work mostly is based around kind of archetypes. That's kind of where I call my subject matter from.
Right, and so is Rodrigo's. And I sort of want Rodrigo to actually sort of like give us a description of what we're looking at when we're looking at the pictures that are over there, and some of which are sort of flashing behind us. What are they of? Because they're also archetypes, and in fact, they are, if I remember correctly, historical archetypes. You didn't just invent them, right? Well, they have a reference point.
No, but to me, the main goal of the images or how they So I remade all these objects out of clay. So you can see in a lot of, I put a lot of little details that you can pay attention. You know, there is corrugated sheets.
But tell us what they are. I mean.
Oh, the barricades.
The barricades.
They're like,
what kind of barricades?
They're mundane objects. The thing with barricades, I want to tell you how I came up with the idea of the barricades and why they are these mundane objects. They're like chairs, bricks, and tires, and very simple objects that I remake with, right? I was reading the book of poetry by Pablo Neruda, the Canto General, General Song, right? In this book of poems, he wrote this epic, like 500 pages book of like, where he tried to retell the story of Latin America from Latin American perspective, right? So I was very interested at that moment of thinking that he was using, and how complicated it was trying to use the language of the colonizer to fight the colonizer itself, right? So how, like, there is no other language that we can like tell a story about our own land without the language of the colonizer, right? So like, because there is a lot of problems with that. But so I was thinking about that when I started thinking about barricades. I was thinking that a lot of the time the materials that you need to protest an institution, they are within the institution itself, right? If they wanted to cancel this talk right now, we could grab this table, those chairs, and put them against the door, right? We use the materials. We don't make new materials to fight institutions, right? A lot of the time you find the pallets and tires and things that you find in the street to like block the street, right? So a lot of the time you use tires, you know, like the things that let the car drive in the street to like stop the car to driving in the street, right? So like there is a lot of like kind of like issues with like kind of the flip side of the materials and what they can do when you like switch your mindset about what they use for, what is the purpose in. So I think these objects, the mundane of the objects, have the reproductivity of the objects, have to do with be able to imitate the things as you normally use them, but really by changing materials, you allow you to like switch your subject position to understand them in a different way.
Because again, you're remaking these objects, right?
Yeah.
In ceramic for the most part. And then
photograph them and rephotograph them, and you know, like, so I build these spaces also that they evoke the act of photography, right? Actually, now in the new project, I'm working even closer to photography, where I'm taking photos of the negative space of some byproduct of capitalism, like this electronic and stuff that I find in the street. So I often do this thing. I want to build a space in photography that evoke the act of photographing something. So there is no doubt that this doesn't exist, but not because it doesn't exist, it's less truthful, right? It's like the thought that you have right now, they didn't exist like 2 minutes ago. You are not imitating from somebody else, but they are not less truthful, right? Feeling like, what is interesting about it is that like, you know, I think like these objects, they need to have some emotional component, and like images are kind of moody, and I really think that you know, like feelings produce thoughts, and thought produce feelings. So I think like there is always this kind of symbiotic relationship between the object that they are familiar to you, that you feel close, and then how you can disrupt that closeness, or how you can use that closeness to fight something.
Well, I really like this idea of like your exploration of truth, or you mentioned making objects that are not less truthful than the objects that we're, well, yeah, that we're more familiar with, the straight ones, as it were, the straight objects. These sort of queer objects are, you know, are something else, but they're no less truthful, right?
I mean, there is something interesting to consider about the truthfulness of, because now we are kind of making fun of the idea of the alternative facts, because it's just kind of like, it's just funny as a justification, but it's not a new idea to justify bad behavior in some way. You know, I mean, you have like 18 years ago, Donald Rumsfeld show up to the press conference to say there is knowns unknowns, and there is unknowns unknowns, to justify the war to like in the invasion, right? So like there is this like unknown, they just tell you, oh, there is things that you never want to know, and then so much, well, don't worry about it, and just let us invade some countries. You know, so like this, the lie, or the high, the thing that recognizing that you may not know everything, sometimes it's so part of the political language that is dangerous, but also it's been present for like a long time.
Yeah, and it's been present clearly also in sort of object making. But Robert, do you find your objects to be any less truthful than the images that you're essentially appropriating?
I mean,
is part of your process
deception.
Trying to question that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, they're supposed to be kind of simultaneously, you know, honest and dishonest at the same time. You know, so they're kind of, you know, the information is all there. You know, in the police barricade, it's all there, down to the nails, to the scratches, all of that stuff is there. So, but it should be simultaneously deceptive. It is deceptive. It's supposed to be deceptive. It's supposed to be cunning, because that's the kind of arena for challenging kind of very basic things, which is what you talked about earlier. But yes, they're deceptive, and they're honest at the same time. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you know, you can, I forgot who it was that sort of said that you can, you know, holding two seemingly opposite ideas in the head at once.
But then that, you know, not getting.
It's not just a sign of schizophrenia, is where I was going to go.
Not at all, but
it can be a sign of sort of great criticality.
I think more generally and kind of more basically, without getting overly philosophical about it, it's you know, the world is unknowable. It simply is. You know, we only know, it's finite what we know about the world, meaning the universe and stuff like that. And it's constantly changing. It's constantly in flux. So I think some of the things that we're thinking about in the work when we're talking about the viewer is like, you know, I'm challenging, you know, in some cases, like just the limitations of vision, like what you can see and what you can't see. And I think the ultimate thing it points to is vulnerability. You know, we're able to only see so many things, whether that's a point of view or literally so far or something like that. And knowledge is constantly changing. So I think my work kind of speaks a little bit more to that angle of it.
Yeah, without necessarily having to arrive at truthiness, the idea that things are not fully true all the time.
Exactly.
Is a you know.
Or they're changing.
Is the palpable reality, maybe, or changing.
Or they're changing. I mean, that's part of my practice, is to really create a foil to the static nature of objects and images and make something that is, even though you've taken like 3 spins around it, I guarantee you a 4th and 5th is going to be a little different. And that's the nature of these kind of displacements.
And part of the nature of that displacement is also to make something familiar strange, right? And
well,
in terms
exactly
of
right.
Sort of doing that, you know, I sort of want to, you know, Rodrigo and I are doing a book, or rather, he's doing a book, and we're doing a long interview, which we haven't finished because we're busy, or he's busy. But I want to sort of jump from the strange to the other. And mention something about your biography, which I think is really key, and that is that you came to the U.S. as an undocumented immigrant, and you worked your ass off doing all kinds of, well, menial jobs until you got a chance to do what you're doing now.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
How I became a non-stranger.
Yeah, you know, and how that's informed your process of sort of othering, I don't know, visuality, right?
I mean, it's interesting that you start talking about, when you open the conversation, you were talking about basically etymology, or like the origin of words or the origin of knowledge, right? I think when you're an immigrant, you are I mean, it takes you a long time to start thinking in terms of otherness, right? And in terms of like, and still. It takes a long time just to stop translating in your mind, right? And once you become normalized to these like words that they are regular thing, and then there is another moment when you start questioning the words that became normal, right? So the process of learning English, and what is interesting is like when I went to college, I went to this really hippie college, Evergreen State College. Like there is no grades, like half of the people is stoned out of their mind all the time. But it was really good to go as an older student, because I had the teacher for myself, because no one is scared, and then it was very free. Like there is not a lot of homework, and you can really do a lot of things. So, but trying to read Kant or trying to read Heidegger as a person that don't even took English as a second language classes is very complicated. So you take your time, you really read slowly, and you really have to think about what you talk. And I think early we addressed this fact of like truthful, or like that we have a problem understanding truthfulness, because we think that immediate thoughts and talking really fast, or like just saying, just like, you know, voting with your guts, you know, like thinking like just like being a straight shooter is a truthful thing to be, right? So like, and then, so what is the room for the one that they want to think about it, for like thoughtfulness and like, and taking time and slow down thought. So I think philosophy helped me to like understand that and think about like how you can think about it, but still, you know, some of the essays, I'm writing some essays for the book, and one of the essays I was telling Leslie about it earlier, that you know, it's about translation and what it does to your brain when you are a foreign person, to like what is translation, right? For example, in Spanish, you say to take a decision, you know, tomar una decisión. You don't say make a decision. In English, you say make a decision, right? So like what it does to your brain when you like consider that you have options, you have like, you take this or that. You just cannot, you don't have agency to like make up decisions, right? Like almost when you're in English thinking, the word is yours. You can just make decisions out of the blue. It's all up to you. When you're a foreign person, you just choose the less worse, you know, the one that's gonna fuck you the less. You will just like, you know, it's like, so, and a lot of the time you don't have room to like think about it. I mean, when I took this job, I teach at UCLA, and it's like, it's a very prestigious opportunity, and it's really nice that, you know, that I have this job, but a lot of my friends are like, you should negotiate. And I was like, do you really would say no? Like, I said, like, how you negotiate something that you would say yes no matter what they offer you, right? So like what is like when I took my first job cleaning floors in Boston like in construction site, it's like $8 an hour, sounds great. Like it's you're not gonna like there's a lot of points in your life where you just don't make decisions, you just take them, right? So like there is a lot of problems, and I wrote a little bit in one of the answers about capitalism, right, and how to fight capitalism, and that it's really impossible for Latinos or like for people of color to fight capitalism because you can really not afford, you know, fight capitalism, right? So like it is really hard to like you know, you can just not show up to work, you know.
Yeah, or not show up to class. I think we should take some questions, but before that, I actually want to give both of you guys the chance to say anything that you haven't
I got
gotten
nothing to say. I want to hear from these guys.
All right.
Right now?
I want to hear.
I doubt very much.
Unless Rodrigo wants to say something else, I'd like to hear from him.
You always have something to say, but maybe we'll go to questions. Anyone? Any brave victims out there? Yes, please. Hello.
I have a question about the show title itself. The decision is named after the famous 1996 How Possible with the same name.
Yeah. What about it? You're asking me why?
What was the decision making? Yeah.
You know, it's a bit of a piss take, to be perfectly frank with you. I mean, you know, Foster wrote that book. He's a champion of postmodernism and a certain kind of relativism that I don't necessarily truck with all the time. And it seemed, when he wrote that book, he wanted to bring back contingency. I mean, these are all very arty terms, but, you know, the idea that, like, you know, there are real social positions and real social actions with real social consequences, political and otherwise, that affect actual human beings, right? Or the environment, or whatever. And so he titled the book, The Return of the Real. I don't think he got very real. So I wanted to do a show that's far more real, or at least the questioning of the real seems to me to be more substantial. So that's the idea. It's a good question. Yes, please.
I have a question about the relationship to photography, because I feel like in both artists there's a relationship to photography. One applying what is, I think, a trajectory in some ways of applying photographic logic to sculpture, which started with Duchamp, right?
Exactly.
And the other coming from, which I think is a much more sort of, like this is a very popular theme in photography now, which is applying sculptural
can, I mean, maybe it's a little more obvious with. Oh,
I think it was more an observation, but it was a good one. I mean, you know, the photography is a starting point to talk about, obviously reality, but also sculpture and photography. You know,
Yeah.
and both of you guys are obviously very much involved in that sort of like pendulum swing.
Yeah.
Right?
So, you know,
Correct.
obviously for my work, the kind of entry point with photography is kind of, is probably, you know, besides the kind of larger discourse between the relationship between the image and the object, which has always been an aspect of my work, this relationship between 2D and 3D. So the image aspect of something and the object aspect of something. But then if you go down kind of a couple rungs of text and you kind of look into like formally what's going on with the work, it comes out of more like kind of the manipulation of images, i.e. Photoshop. I mean, this is right out of Photoshop, but obviously it's not Photoshop, it's 3D. So I think that's kind of what you're asking, or a kind of...
That's a connection you're making.
That's a connection you're making on my half. I mean, I'm not really talking about Duchamp, but I understand like the genesis there. But for me, you know, it comes out of kind of more current things, like these kind of, I guess, manipulative tools. But I guess we step back a little bit. The larger discussion is data and the redistribution of data, because that's certainly present in the work. The idea that the normative and all of its variation and repetitions are all going to have the same data in it. They're just manipulated and changed. And then they can go back to that normative as well.
Yeah, and since the normative is totally up for sort of like, you know, debate these days.
But as it refers
in myriad kinds of ways.
But as it refers to the image, you know, this was part of the design process too. I'm never kind of just making an object. I'm actually making an object with an understanding of kind of the relationship between its legibility and its abstract qualities. So, you know, something that is more legible can go kind of a little further in terms of like the gap that's being created there. But once again, I'm always thinking about this kind of two-dimensional and three-dimensional relationship, even through the distortion. And in that kind of implies photography, but I think more like simulacra is another aspect of that.
Rodrigo, you got anything or
No, I mean, I think it's a good comment.
Yeah, I agree.
I think I hope you don't get offended, but there's the sculptors, you sculptors are not very sculptural, right? They're like,
or they defy sculpture.
Yeah. And in this, I said that is a good word. I guess your vocabulary is better than mine, but.
It is my first language.
But you know the interesting thing.
We can do this.
I think like defining the material itself. I think the photographs, right? It's like coming back to the real or the fake, or what is real in some way. I think photography does it every single time. The problem is that when you make the objects, people have more. Authority to tell you that it's not real, right? But like in some way, in a really like annoying way that you would never ask somebody, like Cartier-Bresson or somebody that take pictures of like in the street, like a street photographer. You'd be like, what you do with the subject after he fell? But to me, it's like, what you do with the materials after you take the pictures? A lot of the time, it's like, what happened with after that? It's like, I don't know what happened to the guy that fell in the street that I took the picture like 2 inches before he hit the floor. It was, oh, you're such a good photographer. And then I'm like, this is not real, right? It's like you glorify one to document something that only happened once. And then you accuse somebody else to not be real, something that happened consistently. So there is a really problem with like what we consider real in this case for like what is more real, the thing that only happened once, or the consistency of thoughts. So I think that is kind of what I want to do with photography. Is kind of like reframe the mindset of what you consider a discord in the work.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
The show and the works in the show work really, really well together. I feel like it's a very timely show. It's very sort of a good reflection of lots of different things going on in our society and everything. I was wondering, in addition to that though, does it allow for room for hope, or does it have any kind of underlying optimism for like a better future?
That sounds like a question for the curator, because I don't think these guys should be having to.
I am very optimistic.
You are optimistic. I'm glad you are. You're not so much.
I don't know. I'm older than him, so.
I'm usually more optimistic with a drink in my hand, but that'll come in a minute. Look, I like putting together shows that have some connection to the real, right? And particularly at moments, at sort of crucial moments, and clearly we are undergoing a set of sort of epical crises, not just nationally, but sort of globally. And, you know, when you can find two artists who are as fantastic as these two to speak to the formal aspects of sculpture and photography, and also to speak to an issue or two, then you've kind of hit the jackpot. So, you know, for those who've seen my last 3 curatorials here, you might make that connection. Not everyone does it, and that's also fine. But I like doing that. So that's my own bias sort of coming through in the organization of a show like this. They're not to be blamed, is where I'm going. Anyone else? Yes, please.
For Robert, you said you had a long design process. And when it comes to the minutiae of a lot of the wear and tear and the weathering on some of your objects, how much of that was pre-planned, and did that happen once you had the physical object in front of you, or was a lot of that pre-designed?
Yeah, no, it's all pre-designed in the sense that, like, I may not, you know, so, you know, what I'll typically do is I'll have a series of models, and some of those models will be like for wear and tear, to basically, you know, show surface wear and stuff like that. And I sit with that for a while, and we're kind of figuring that out. I have a guy that I work with specifically who's my colorist, basically, and we do those things together. But, you know, early on, part of the process is getting photographic source material. So that's kind of where all that stuff is being, like, you know, I don't want this, I don't want this. Police barricades, oh my God, there's hundreds of them on the streets of New York City. So I was you know, I have thousands of photographs of police barricades, and I was like, okay, that's what I don't want, or this one's too beat up, or this one's too weathered. And those decisions get kind of made along the way, and then it all kind of percolates up to when we have the final object. But I know what I'm doing before the final object is in front of me, like very much so. It's not probably figured out in the early design stage unless it's something that's like the object that I'm proposing with Graphic Studio is basically a padlock and chain, and it's unlike some of the other objects I've done, it's a little newer. So the choices on that are going to be a lot easier in terms of finish and stuff like that. But those finish choices are done over a period of time. They're done over specific models, you know, scaled down models, and then kind of translated to full scale and on the actual object. Because once again, you know, if, you know, I'm getting something CNC milled and it's like 20, 30 grand that I'm spending, you know, I want to do it once. I don't want to do it like, you know, I'd rather do like 10 models and then be like, this is what we're doing. I'm not going to do it a bunch of times.
All right, let's maybe take a last question. Yes, please.
So I'm very interested in the way that you both play with the being of the object. And I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this question, but I want to know something about where you see the real residing. Does it reside in the cognitive process of parsing the object that gets revealed when the object is misplaced or distorted in some way, so that it has to do with something about the surface of the real, versus, and this is, to put this in kind of Kantian terms, or you know, other in the Levinasian sense of something that's you know, not encounterable. Precisely when the object is challenged, I encounter the real, something because it resides beyond what I could have encountered. So it's something about the infinite flexibility of the object to present itself in new ways.
Let me hit this.
See, this is what happens when you do conversations at universities. Every now and again, someone will pop up who absolutely knows their philosophy.
Yeah,
so.
I'm not sure half of those references, but I'm going to tell you kind of my understanding of what you were trying to ask. So it's absolutely in the in approaching and being in front of the object. That's when all those things happen. I mean, for my work, and I think with Rodrigo as well, but he'll tell you about it. part of what's functioning is that, you know, you're coming at it, you know, it's not a police barricade and the actual police barricade. So that relationship is never presented right in front of you. So where's the tension? The tension is between the idea of a police barricade, how familiar you are with it, or a shot up street sign. That is the electricity, that is the thing. So it is superficial, and it is upon kind of unpacking and figuring out and moving around the object. That's exactly, for me, that's where it occurs. It's not something cognitive, exterior. It's like, it is the viewing experience. That's when that stuff happens. Am I answering that correctly?
I think so. So
Okay.
It's happening on the surface.
Yeah, it's total surface.
I think I know what
And in the brain, and memory is a big part of it, because
the microphone.
there's always, oh, I'm sorry. There's always the notion of what the actual object is. That's the interplay there.
I think what, like, because I think that the foundation in your question, it is, I think why you mentioned Kant is because you're thinking about, you know, the real or the reproduction is what, you know, Kant could be in the safe distance to appreciate sublime, right? Like, you can't sit in the storm, directly into the storm, you're just like scared, right? You gotta go to the mountain and look at the storm to feel to feel it, right? And to be from a safe distance, right? So like a lot of the romantic painters, they were not plein air painters, right? They were guys that were like going and sketching in a safe day and then bring the storm in the studio, right? So that is kind of how like we think about it. We bring the storm into the studio because we think from a safe distance to what is that like the fakeness, or what is the consciousness of the object can bring the object to be sublime in some way. Even if not, I consider you or me trying to achieve sublime, because, you know, that could be a weird, but I think that is what, like, your question was going, you know, like that is kind of like how we enter emotionally and physically an object.
The storm is scary, though.
The storm is scary, as we all know.
If you're in a nice house.
Hurricane? Let's go see the show, shall we? Before we do, let me just give thanks to everybody who helped install, who helped put together the show. The staff really, the folks at USFCAM were just the most wonderful people to work with. They really are. They really, really are. Margaret and my pals here, I could not have, this conversation couldn't have gone better, at least for me. I hope the same for you. Please enjoy the show, and if you've got any questions for these guys in particular, go and ask them. Thank you so much.